The Accounting Move Project is the only regular advocacy effort for women in financial services that measures and supports the progress of women every year. The Move Project's scope includes women, women of color, and ethnic minorities at every point in the leadership pipeline at accounting and advisory firms. I am Joanne Cleaver. I run Wilson Taylor Associates, an independent research firm that designed and manages the Move Project in partnership with the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance. And I have some great news. Contrary to national workforce trends, women are doing better than ever at Move Project CPA firms. The wrenching shift to remote work in 2020 was a huge lift for women. Yes, this pandemic economy has been stressful for everyone, especially for working caregivers who overwhelmingly are women. But accounting and advisory firms that were already doing right by women had an automatic advantage in capturing pandemic work. Firms that were already doing right by women had momentum with remote work, remote collaboration, and remote business development. Firms that were already doing right by women did even better when their women leaders set the tone for employee and client well-being. Firms that were already doing right by women had models that they applied to start or accelerate diversity programs to do even better by ethnic minorities, minorities who are already employed at firms, and minorities the profession needs to recruit. The Accounting Move Project started in 2010 with the generous and ongoing support of Moss Adams, our founding sponsor. And from the start, we have partnered with the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance, which is the only organization solely dedicated to the advancement of women in accounting and advisory professions. We also bring Move Project results and tools to the huge universe of CPA Academy through its professional development platform, which reaches hundreds of thousands of financial professionals. The Move Project focuses both on the advancement of women and on the advancement of ethnic minorities within the accounting profession. Briefly, here's how the Move Project works. Our annual survey collects demographics about the status of women in the profession. Typically, we gather statistics about how many women and ethnic minorities are in the partnership pipeline. We want to see where women and minorities advance and where their presence dwindles. All of this is in a report released by the AFWA and found at its website. We also gather qualitative information through the survey and through phone interviews about the culture and practices, barriers and opportunities for women and for minorities. The 4 key factors that the Move Project tracks are M, money, that's pay equity. We don't care how much you pay as long as you can show us that you have internal checks and balances that ensure that women and ethnic minorities are paid equitably for the same work. O is opportunity, which is leadership development and the partnership pipeline and career pathing. V is vital supports your work life, everything from flexible workplace, remote work opportunities, benefits and aspects of culture that support wellness, well-being, and employee and dependent support. And E is entrepreneurship or business development. Together, the statistics and the stories show us what aspects of culture and what proactive programs actually work to advance women and minorities now in today's economic conditions. We concentrate only on programs and aspects of culture that open new ways for women and minorities to drive business results. So, for example, a philanthropic outreach for, say, underwriting a women's history event might be nice, but unless it represents a fresh take on business development, we would not count it as a way of advancing women at that firm. The theme of the 2020 Move Project is permanent progress from pandemic pivots. And it immediately became clear that there was a huge story in how firms that were already doing right by women fared in the confusion of spring 2020 pandemic response. Until March 2020, we often heard it just wasn't fair to have remote work that was mainly aimed at women, especially working parents. Oh no, what if everyone wanted to work remotely? Then all of a sudden, everybody was working remotely. And it quickly became clear that firms that had robust, multidimensional modes of remote work were perfectly positioned to capture enormous amounts of pandemic work. Firms that already had technical support for home-based workers and had established ways for teams to collaborate virtually and had trained their managers in ways of managing remote teams by productivity, not FaceTime, those firms already had their remote work groove, and they were able to seamlessly move into all remote work. For example, one firm had a mid-level professional who was the in-house guru for facilitating webinars. When the COVID economic response meant that millions of companies needed accurate, immediate guidance on PPP and other supports, she led the charge at her firm to inform and support clients. She led a webinar a day for 30 days. She trained others in the art of virtual facilitation. And that firm was first to market with services that clients desperately needed. All because it was already doing right by its women by having a robust remote work program. As well, firms with high proportions of women in leadership also were able to respond with emotional intelligence. Suddenly, privacy was shot, and people's families' business was everybody's business. Communication, empathy, and other aspects of culture that traditionally women lead with were the skills that kept teams and firms intact and on track. Firms moved fast when they had to. Now they're realizing that speed is a powerful advantage. That means that they need to identify rising talent faster than ever. Women's initiatives are excellent channels for finding rising talent within firms. Many Move project firms use their initiatives as talent incubators, and they found that even young professionals were more ready than partners realized for taking charge of new projects and working to help clients in a pinch. As well, every manager has had to learn how to manage remote and hybrid teams. This year, 71% of Move firms report that they train managers to manage virtual teams. That's up from 45% in 2020. Managing by results and productivity, not by an accident of proximity, otherwise known as who happens to be here in the office, is the way forward. Your contribution is not inherent to your location. Smart firms are overhauling their evaluations and performance metrics to center more fully around true productivity. Out of sight, top of mind. Remote work suddenly shifted from being a career backup plan to a mission-critical tool. Move firms moved fast to formalize previously casual remote work arrangements. There's a lot of talk right now about how hiring people as remote workers from the start and how that opens up talent and recruiting nationally. But hiring them is just the first step. How will they advance in their careers through career paths that are location agnostic? Move firms that already had integrated career and work-life paths are a step ahead of their competitors that organize work and responsibilities around location. This involves more than just gathering up metrics about hours worked and time on Zoom calls. This also involves how firms are figuring out how work-life and wellness benefits translate permanently to remote work. Firms are figuring out how employee resource groups and virtual connections open up new ways of mentoring and executive sponsorship. One big surprise was how Zoom meetings open new ways for women and minorities to connect across locations, practices, and levels. The Brady Bunch type squares in a Zoom call are an equalizer. Everybody literally occupies the same amount of space. It's no longer a gender struggle to have a place at the table. You have your place, same as everybody else's. This has changed the dynamic of internal networking for younger women, and it has created new ways for women's and employee resource groups to organize peer support. There's quite a bit of work to fully build out partner tracks for completely remote workers. A few Move project firms are working on this. And firms must get better at understanding exactly how flexible work arrangements directly drive growth and client acquisition and retention. Right now, only 13% of firms formally measure the return of flexible work arrangements to senior management in terms of employee retention and client retention. Firms also need to better understand the underlying dynamics of remote work and collaboration so that they can continue to evolve employee resource groups and partner development to integrate these abilities. Some Move project firms have long relied on aspects of culture to propel women to partnership. But the national conversation in 2020 centered around embedded barriers for Black Americans, including economic and career barriers. In early 2021, a new set of events launched a parallel conversation about barriers that Asian Americans face. These are structural problems, and 7 Move firms that previously had success in advancing women just by force of culture added structured diversity efforts to become more purposeful about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Firms quickly pivoted to add employee resource groups for working parents. Now, 28% of firms offer this benefit, up from 21% in 2020. The same happened for employee groups devoted to Blacks, with 28% of firms now offering such groups. Overall, though, firms are centering their diversity efforts around inclusion and are more about finding common ground than about creating many specialty employee groups. And firms still have a ways to go to connect the insights of employee resource groups to external marketing and business development. It's possible that the effort of creating or recentering employee groups was the top priority in 2020 and early 2021, and that firms will soon get down to the business mission of the groups and external relationships. So that's the good news that I promised. The huge business story for the entire pandemic is that women are stuck or out of their careers due to the head-on collision of work and life. But Move firms that already were doing the right things not only retained women, but captured more business with less friction. What was right for women was what was right for the entire firm. For just the 2021 research cycle, the Move project only asked about 2 demographic categories: all employees by gender and race, and all principals and partners by gender and race. That is because of the lingering blurred lines about what an employee actually is these days. Some firms are still bringing people back from furloughs, some employees are cycling between staff and contract status, and there are other complications to literally counting who's who within firms. For 2022, we will resume our traditional demographic categories. Meanwhile, here's the baseline. Women maintained as over half of all employees at Move firms. And women did really well in advancing to partnership, rising to 32%. This reflects steady progress. Firms are seeing a return on their steady investments in developing and retaining women. 32% is a big milestone. It's a big deal. Academic reports repeatedly find that when women comprise at least a third of people in a meeting, women are heard on their own terms. Instead of, quote, speaking for all women or otherwise being marginalized, at about a third of the group, the dynamics change. So this 32% is an important marker of progress, and it could have the effect of accelerating advocacy for women, by women, for women as well. But this is not a completely straightforward 32% for a variety of complicated factors inherent to this year's Move project and the statistics that we gathered. There's definitely organic progress, but this year also was an anomaly in several ways. So let's unpack that 32%. First, the good news. For firms that consistently participate in the Move project year over year, nearly all held steady or gained women partners and principals. At firms with very high percentages of women partners and principals, we saw a little vacillation. They lost one woman, for instance, but still kept it over 50%. More important, firms that consistently participate in the Move project had higher proportions of women on the brink of partnership. And here's the important thing, those women stuck with it. This is a big story given that the national trend was for women to drop out of work or scale back due to irreconcilable work-family conflicts. Retention was critical at accounting and advisory firms, and top leaders knew it. This was the moment for strong work-life programs to deliver, and for career pathing to deliver, and for all of that to center around remote work and employees' career paths remotely. And a lot of firms pulled it off. They kept women in the pipeline, and they kept them progressing to the top consistently. Acquisitions also helped. In prior Move project reports, we have looked at the equity bonus, when firms use gender equity as a consideration when acquiring smaller firms. Consistently, large firms tell us that a higher proportion of women leaders is a key indicator of cultural fit when they're considering an acquisition target. We don't know if more women leaders actually translates to a higher acquisition price. But we do know that acquiring firms use gender equity as one factor in assessing the long-term return on that acquisition. That includes the ease of integrating the new firm into the bigger firm, as gender equity tends to indicate aligned values between the two firms. And larger firms that are intent on advancing women do not want to dilute their equity numbers through acquisition. But for this year's Move project cycle, all the other factors also played into this 32%, that take a little bit of bloom off the flower just for this year. We still have a flower though, so that's the important thing to remember. Here are a couple of factors that add nuance to that 32%. We had a different mix of firms this year. 2 large, consistently participating firms paused their participation, and those firms trend at about 27 or 28% women partners and principals. It is likely that if their numbers were included this year, we would be reporting 30 or 31% women partners and principals instead of 32. As well, we had a burst of new firms join the Move project, and those firms weighted to percentages of women partners and principals at about 35%. They pulled up the historic trend by a couple of points. It's important to note that the Move project always includes some firms with very low percentages of women in senior leadership. These firms are part of the Move project because they are very behind and they need to catch up. These firms participate confidentially and are not quoted in the report because they know that they're still working on their advancement of women. So I expect that in the next Move project cycle, when recurring firms are again part of the mix and we retained the new firms, we'll see that 32% decline just a smidge to maybe 30 or 31%. That would be more in line with the historic trend line for the Accounting Move project, and it still represents really good, steady progress. When it comes to racial diversity, not much changed this year. Blacks and Hispanics are still underrepresented as employees and as partners and principals. Asians are a bit overrepresented as employees but lag as partners. I expect that the new diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at several firms will make a measurable change in next year's numbers. Lots of firms are partnering with historically Black colleges and universities to recruit, but they also need to build stronger ties with minority students at community and state colleges. Firms have a huge opportunity to retain and develop minority professionals with new channels of virtual mentorship and employee community. The next step is for firms to get even better at using virtual channels to equip minority professionals with a kind of business development experiences that qualify them to become partners. The ongoing M, O, V, and E factors offered some pretty good insights. The trend lines for the Move factors hold with both the raw numbers and for only firms that are regular Move participants, so we did not notice any jarring or especially dramatic jumps this year in the Move statistics. So for M, money, accountability for pay equity is rising. Much of this is due to more stringent requirements by states and for federal contractors for pay equity. Pay equity is no longer the responsibility of the Human Resources Department. It is becoming the responsibility of every partner and every manager. The shift to virtual work and accelerated long-term trends towards integrated training and career paths and custom coaching. Following the lead of firms like Clark Nuber, Raymond, Bonadio, and Moss Adams, firms are taking holistic approaches that bring in short-term, more tightly focused resources and experiences to each level of career development and progression. This also makes these short-term opportunities more accessible for mid-career women who have a crush of personal and professional responsibilities. The most literal permanent progress from pandemic pivots, which is our theme, is the big jump in subsidized emergency childcare from 48% last year to 66% this year. Firms are still catching up with how they can offer the full slate of work-life benefits to remote workers. So, this progress with subsidized care is a great indicator of how firms are taking this seriously. Finally, making the most of women and minority employee insights to grow local businesses, that's a concept that some firms like MCM do really well, and it's an area where others struggle. Understandably, new and newly relevant employee resource groups are still finding their footing. We expect to see some fresh ideas and approaches to building careers through building local businesses in the next Move project cycle. This is a pivot year for the Move project too. We now run the research calendar later in the year to better equip firms in the fall recruiting season. We collaborated with CPA Academy to create a new form of equipping firms, a June mini summit that's laser focused on super practical tips and tactics. And we are concentrating on how women can navigate their careers in the context of issues of race, identity, and life circumstance. The Move team is deeply encouraged at how this profession has made real gains, not despite the pandemic, but because of it. This reveals some deep current and commitment to progress. Now, let's open for questions.